Today I'll be showing you guys how to replace your fuel injectors on a 10th gen Civic, the 1.5 liter turbo application. This is a SI specifically. We're going to disconnect the battery. First, disconnect the negative terminal. You're going to disconnect it using a 10mm socket. Just set it aside, put a cloth on it so it's not touching any metal. Now disconnect the positive terminal. You're just going to lift up on this plastic thing, disconnect that nut right there. Now you'll just need to remove the brace holding down the battery. Just using a 10mm socket, a deep socket, you're just going to loosen this nut right there. Once you have that loose, you should be able to just lift it up. It hooks into this side, little hole on the side right here, so you just have to get it out of there, and we'll just set that to the side. Now just lift out your battery, and then this plastic casing will mine's a little broken, but you just push forward and then it should lift out. Has little plastic studs that slide into those holes right there. Next, we're gonna remove this rubber pipe that's connected to the throttle body and this tube connecting to the turbo. You're just gonna loosen this tensioner strap, and there's another tensioner strap towards where it connects to the throttle body. You're just gonna loosen both of those. Disconnect it from this end, and then you're just gonna have to wiggle it off. I'm gonna use a screwdriver, kind of get underneath, then I can just wiggle it off, pull it down, and then you can wiggle it off the throttle body. You can also unclip these hoses and kind of move them to the side so you get better access with your hands. Loosen these, you can use a 8mm socket. I'm just gonna use a flathead screwdriver to loosen them. All right, got that tube removed. Just gonna set that aside. And now that we have that tube removed, we're gonna loosen these 10mm screws. There's connecting the throttle body to the intake manifold. There's 4, 1 at each corner, 2 on the top, you can see, and there's 2 below. There's 1. If I can get in there. You see the 2 on the bottom. Just gonna loosen those up, the 10mm deep socket, an extension to reach the screws. All right, got the 4 10mm bolts removed. Now your throttle body is loose, and you can just move it off of the intake manifold. Also, you can use this as an opportunity to see how dirty it is, see if you want to wipe it off and clean it, just because you got it all opened up. Now we're going to start removing tubes off the intake manifold itself. It's just located right behind the engine right here. So you're going to want to take some needle nose pliers, loosen up this tensioner, lift it up, pop this hose off, loosen this tensioner, lift this hose off, loosen this tensioner, and then I'm going to disconnect it from this point since it's metal, and then these on the intake manifold are plastic, so just less risk of breaking things because plastic is more easily broken. So yeah, disconnect this tube, this tube, this tube, and then we're going to, this is actually broken, but you lift this up and then we'll lift that tube out. And then there's a tube back here. You're gonna lift up this tensioner and then disconnect that tube from the intake manifold. So let's just do all that real quick. So these tubes will probably be a little difficult to remove since I feel like the heat from your engine kind of like binds it to the connection points a little bit. So you can use like a flathead screwdriver, kind of get in between, lift it back, and then with your other hand, just kind of pull them off. All right, we've got all those tubes disconnected and just kind of put them off to the side. Next, just disconnect the sensor. Just has a plastic clip. You just push down, pull out to release it. Using a 10mm socket with probably an extension, you're going to loosen this 10mm bolt to remove this bracket off the intake manifold. Right, with that loosened, you can just kind of move that to the side. Nextly, you're gonna go on this end, and then you have this plastic piece holding this tube to this metal bracket. You're just gonna push forward, and then you can, I'm gonna have to do this with 2 hands, but you can push forward and then, oh yeah, I got it off. You can just lift it off that way. All right, next we're gonna remove this metal bracket right here, and then we got a 12mm bolt right there, so we need a 12mm socket to remove that. And then down here at the bottom, you can see those two 10mm bolts. You'll have to loosen those with a 10mm socket. And then this tube that connected down here is just in these little plastic clips, so just unclip it out of there. There's just two locations for that, but I'm gonna get this loosened up and removed. I forgot to mention, before removing the bracket, I would recommend using some needle nose pliers. You just press down on the sides, then you can pull that out, disconnect this hose from the bracket, and then before you can take that out, you're also going to remove this lower, smaller bracket underneath, and you just have to loosen this 10mm bolt, the 10mm socket. So let's just do that real quick. All right, we got that smaller bracket removed, and then you can also just take off this foam piece too, or just set these aside. I just keep my bolts in the holes so I remember everything goes. Right now, using your needle nose pliers, you're just gonna go in and just compress the sides of these clips, and then you can push them down and remove this foam piece with these plastic pieces that hold it in. And yeah, so with these, they're a little complicated. You'll have to basically push these in to push them down, and then also push in from this, and then you can kind of work it out. And then it's also clips in right there, but it just pulls off. All right, now using a 12mm, I'm using a deep socket with an extension. We're gonna start actually removing the intake manifold off the block. So firstly, we're gonna start off by removing this nut, this screw, and you can kind of see it back there. Get it to focus. There's another nut right there, and they're all 12mm. And this back one, you see the stud right there. It can be pretty difficult, so as I'm backing it out, I just had this magnetic snake to catch the nut so it didn't drop in the engine bay. Right, and there's two on the bottom. They're kind of difficult to see, but they have little viewing holes. They're on each inside, which you can see my socket going on the bolt right there. There's the one, and then the other one is at the other end. Try to get this to, there we go. You can see my socket going on that bolt right there. We'll just have to loosen those from underneath. As you're backing out those bottom bolts, I just try to have both my hands, one loosening it and then the other hand kind of cupping underneath so you don't drop those down in the engine bay. But with all that loosened and removed, we should be able to remove our intake manifold now. It should just pop out like so. There you go. While you're changing your fuel injectors, I would recommend changing out these rubber gaskets and your throttle body's gasket. You'll just want to wipe down take out the old ones, wipe down the surface, and then put on the new ones. The intake manifold removed. Now we have access to the fuel rail. And firstly, we're going to want to remove this bracket on this side of the fuel rail, and it's just 10mm bolt and another 10mm bolt. So we're gonna take that out real quick. All right, got that bracket removed. Just gonna set that to the side. Next step in removing the fuel rail, got this little connection valve right there, and we're gonna loosen that with a 19mm wrench, and you're gonna do so by, let's see, get that on there so you can see, and you're gonna pull towards the engine to loosen it. I didn't put a rag underneath because it's gonna leak out some gasoline, but now I'm just using my hand. I'm just gonna freaking focus. Yeah, there's some gas leaking out, you can see. Just back that off. And with that piece detached, we can loosen these 2 nuts and 6 bolts along the fuel rail. and there will be 10 millimeter. All right, and with all those nuts and bolts removed, we can wiggle off the fuel rail. You'll just have to go along it and kind of wiggle it, work it out, and then I'm going to be using a flathead screwdriver to kind of get in between, try to pry it out a little bit. Just be gentle, don't scrape the metal. You don't want to ruin this surface. Got the fuel rail popped off. Some gas will leak out of here, so that's why I got the rag down here. I want to wipe off some of this stuff. You know, you just don't want it to ignite when you start your car or anything like that. I'm actually only replacing one fuel injector because I replaced this one and these, and then one of the new ones I got was broken, so I just had to put the old one in, and I'm just switching that one out now. But to basically remove them, you'll just have to, it's going to be more difficult than I'm showing right now. I can almost guarantee that, but you'll just have to wiggle and then get your finger underneath while you're wiggling it from this electrical connection point. You'll just have to wiggle it and pull out, and then it will pop out, and then you can push down on the plastic tab underneath and disconnect it. We got our old fuel injector right here removed. Make sure the O-rings come out with it as well and they're not lodged in your fuel rail. You don't want to double up on those, so just make sure you have your O-ring on your new one, and then these clips, it's just going to go on. Basically, here's the clip. It's like U-shaped and it just slides on. Like so, and then you can kind of just push down a little bit to get the clip in, and that's how you put the clip back on. We're gonna pop that back in, and just to help it slide in more easily, because I found after replacing these, the new ones were extremely difficult to get in. Most cars I've worked on, they just pop in, but these I had to use a hammer and lightly tap on them to get it to go into place, because I would use all my force to push on it to get it in. I just couldn't get it to go in. So you might have the same difficulties, just be pre-warned of that. But to help it slide in more easily, I just put a little bit of WD-40 on your finger and applied it around this little plastic piece, which helps seals the connection. But yeah, we'll just try to get it in now. And the strategy I would use to get them in, try firstly plugging the injector in, and then using one hand kind of wiggle it back and forth to help walk it in, and then using your other hand put pressure on the top of the fuel injector to push it in. And if that doesn't work, which wasn't working for me personally, I would just put a rag folded up, lay it over on top of the injector, and then using a hammer lightly tap it into place halfway, and then you should be able to pop it in the rest of the way with your hand. That's what I had to do with the other three, so probably I'm gonna try to push it in manually, and if that doesn't work, I'll just tap it in. Luckily, I was able to just push it in using the force from my hand, which is how most cases you are supposed to do it. But just to reiterate, if that doesn't work, which this is a method I had to do for the other three, just folding up a shop rag like so, and I just placed it over, and then using a hammer, I tapped on the top of the injector, not the plastic electrical part that plugs in the pigtail. I just tapped on this part of the injector lightly, not super hard or aggressive. This plastic piece on top can break very easily, so that's why it helps having the rag on top to absorb some of the force and not have direct metal contact on it. But luckily I was able to pop it in. You should be able to pop it in theory, but if not, that strategy worked for me, just tapping it in with the hammer. Now we're gonna put the fuel rail back on, and you'll just wanna start off by basically getting this nozzle to hook up with the fuel rail, and then you'll slide this over the injector and then push it on the rest of the way. You'll have to wiggle it on. I'll show it a little bit better because I have to use two hands to do this, but you just want to make sure that you start off by getting the nozzle into the fuel rail's hole, and then getting it lifted over the first injector, and then you can lay it on the rest of the way. Getting the fuel rail back on can be a little tricky, so I'm just taking a hammer and then basically lightly tapping like so, not aggressively, not slamming into it. You don't want to bend the metal or damage it, just going across evenly and tapping it into place. And then once it's down far enough, we can just screw that nozzle back on and put the bolts back into place. And I forgot to mention, before you put the fuel rail back on, I think it would be wise to take a rag, spray some brake cleaner on the rag, and just wipe off the surface before reapplying everything back together, just to clean it off. And then in terms of bolting down and screwing this in, just hand tighten the valve piece in first, and then hand tighten. I just start off with the nuts, hand tighten those down, and then hand tighten all the screws in, and then you want to evenly across tighten it down. That way you just don't warp the metal surface. So, you know, just tighten it a little bit, go across the whole thing, tighten it a little bit more, do about 3 times, and it should be on secure. Just make sure it's firm. Don't over tighten any of this. You don't want to break a bolt. Now we're just gonna start putting everything back together. Firstly, put this metal bracket back over the fuel rail, tighten that down. Slide the intake manifold back into place, and then to have it correctly mounted, just make sure each corner is put, the holes are put onto those studs. There's 2 on top. Right now you're just gonna tighten both nuts. Firstly, I would just tighten the nuts down, hand tighten them on both those studs on each end, then put in the 3 bolts, the one in the middle and then the 2 underneath, and then just evenly tighten it across the board. I just hand tighten them all down, like kind of crisscrossing, and then I'd slowly tighten each one, and then just did that about 3 times till it was tight enough. Don't over tighten it, just get it nice and firm. And this is plastic, so you just want to do it evenly so you don't risk warping the intake manifold by applying too much pressure on one end before evenly tightening across the board. Now we're just going to put back in this foam piece. You can't really see it, you'll just have to feel it, but these clip into a tube underneath the intake manifold. You'll just have to feel it out, you can't really see it visually. And then I just start by clipping those on, and then popping these back in through these 2 holes right there. All right, now screw this bracket back into place with its 10mm bolt. Put this foam piece back into its place, the larger bracket into place, screwing in the 12mm bolt and the 2 10s located at the bottom. Below the large bracket, you're gonna put the smaller bracket back into place. I would just screw it in, but leave it still loose, and then you can kind of maneuver this clip back on over the bracket and then just tighten it up the rest of the way. Now you're just gonna clip this back into that hole into the bracket. You're gonna put this hose back into this clip, back into that clip right there, and then push the end back on to that plastic tip, put the tensioner back on. You're gonna put this hose back in its plastic clip, plug this sensor back in right on top right there, put this hose back onto that tip, put the tensioner back down, put this hose back onto that tip, put the tensioner down, this hose back onto this metal tip with the tensioner on. Now you're going to put the throttle body back onto the intake manifold and tighten all 4 10mm bolts back in. Just do crisscross pattern evenly across the board, tightening it, each bolt, you know, progressively. That way you evenly distribute the tension across of it, putting it back onto the intake manifold. All right, now you're just gonna put this tube back into place, connecting it to the throttle body and this plastic piece right here, and tighten down your tensioners each end, and then put these tubes back into place as well. Your battery housing back into place, you just set it down, slide it back, put your battery back in with the positive terminal on the front end and the negative on the rear. And you can put the brace back over the battery, just slide that small hook into this hole on the side, and then for the longer one there is a hole, the metal bracket you can stick that L into and then tighten it down from that nut, and connect your battery terminals. Connect the positive first and then the negative. We're gonna turn it on and test it. It's gonna start a little funny because there's no fuel in the system, so I'll have to run through, so it'll be a little bit of a rough start. There we go. Well, you're gonna have every code pretty much popping up like it's doing right now. That's just because you disconnected your battery, so you're just gonna have to drive your car around for a few days, and then the codes, basically the computer will readjust to your driving, and then the codes will go away. So don't be too alarmed by that. You'll just have to drive your car for a few days for all the codes to disappear. Yep, that concludes this tutorial. Hopefully it helped you guys out. Should save you a ton of money just doing it yourself. It's not the most difficult job. Has some difficulties about it, but it's definitely manageable by most people with basic mechanic experience. But hope you guys enjoyed this video and it was useful information for you. If it was, please consider liking, commenting if you have any suggestions, or tell me how you feel, and subscribe. Have a good one, guys. Woo!